Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever seen a ghost? I have not. I have never seen a ghost, so I'm not sure I believe in ghosts. I'm a bit of a skeptic. Well, I'm a scientist. In my physiology lab, we do some very interesting experiments that prove that the human eye is constantly playing tricks on us. It is constantly filling in what it thinks should be there. Neurophysiology, with the recent discovery of mirror neurons, is offering some titillating clues as to a possible mechanism for one of the strongest forces in nature, certainly human nature, the power of suggestion. How is it that voices, sounds, sights, and images, latent, buried deep in our subconscious, can suddenly leap into consciousness and appear or sound very, very real? So physiology offers plausible explanations for ghost sightings. But physics, astrophysics. Now, astrophysics would tell us that we are surrounded by ghosts. Some of the stars in the dark night sky are but ghosts. Some of the twinkling light that we perceive as a star was sent out into the universe by a distant sun so far away, so long ago, that it has since died, yet its light shines on. So I think I believe in ghost stars. I'm not sure I believe in ghost people walking around in this earthly realm. And so last year, when I was called upon to do a series of local ghost legends for the Haunted Bloomington Project with Voces Novae Chamber Chorus, I, as a scientist, decided I need to do some research. So I set out to research the ghosts of Haunted Bloomington. My research first took me to Reed Hall on the IU campus. Reed Hall is home to not one, but two ghosts, or ghost stories. The first night, I saw nothing. Second night, campus security escorted me away, telling me I was the only creepy thing at Reed Hall that night. I never saw a ghost. I went to every local haunt. According to local legend, I never saw a ghost. My research even took me beyond Bloomington, out into the haunted hills of southern Indiana, to the Morgan Monroe State Forest, home of the legend of the Witch of Step Cemetery. And in my background research, I learned something I did not know and I think is contrary to popular belief. I read that cemeteries are hardly ever haunted. Well, think about it. Ghosts, they say, typically return to the places where they spent a great deal of time in life. Most of us do not spend a great deal of time in cemeteries in life. Now, in death, yes, very long time, perhaps all eternity, but not in life. But not so the Witch of Step Cemetery. And please understand, she is not at all a witch. She wears a long black dress, but it is the dress of mourning, typical of 100 years ago. And it is said that she is simply a poor woman, driven mad with grief. Her name is Anna, and Anna was driven mad with grief over first the loss of her husband Jacob in an accident at the stone quarry where he works. Then, 17 years later, 1927, the loss of their only child, her beautiful, beloved Emily, in a tragic car accident on Emily's first, only, and last date. So driven mad with grief, Anna, in her long black dress of mourning, took to Step Cemetery at all hours of the night and day, sitting on a tree stump. It's now called the Witch's Throne, but again, not a witch. Sitting on a tree stump, singing to her loved ones a lullaby, an Irish lullaby. Tooraloo-ra-loo-ra, tooraloo-ra-lay. And legend holds that if she sees you, she swishes you away with a glare and flies off. Now, I had been to Stepp Cemetery dozens of times. You can use it as a trailhead for part of the Tecumseh Trail. I never saw a thing. That was during the day, and it is said that she has been seen during the day, but that she more commonly haunts at night. So, as part of my research, I went at night. I took my brother. He had just flown in from Seattle for a visit. I picked him up at the Indianapolis airport. Coming down 37 or 69, I exited off Liberty Church Road into the Morgan Monroe State Forest. And without a word about my research or what we were doing, not a word about the legend of the Witch of Stepp Cemetery, I pulled off Main Forest Road into the little gravel parking area. It was a beautiful October evening, quite breezy, somewhat chilly, almost a full moon, a waxing gibbous, about 7/8 full, a beautiful October evening. It's a lovely path back to the cemetery. It's lined by trees, their branches overarching. That dappled moonlight was shining through the trees and sparkling and dancing on shards of geodes, working their way out of the soil. It's a lovely path. Then you come to a little sign, Stepp Cemetery, and into the heart of the witch's haunt. Now, I walked to the center of the cemetery, and I was pacing back and forth, racking my brain as to how I was going to scare my brother. All right, growing up, he was always scaring me with ghost stories, pranks, hoaxes. I could never pull one over on him. He would be a tough nut to crack, but this was my chance. Now, my brother chose to follow the woods, the perimeter of the cemetery, curving to the right. And he was walking right towards the witch's throne when he cried out, "What's that? Do you hear that?" "No, what?" "It's a woman singing a lullaby. I believe it's an Irish lullaby." Okay. Now, what are the chances of that? All right, this is getting weird. But no. What I heard was normal night sounds in the forest. I heard the wind blowing through the trees. I heard the rustling of dry leaves. Rustle, 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 rustle. And off in the distance, the hoot of a barred owl. There's tons of them out there. They hoot all day and night. Normal night sounds of the forest. Right. All right. Now, sound is the movement of air molecules. Hence, thunder can rattle your windows, right? Mm-hmm. Wind is also the movement of air molecules from high pressure to low. Now, wind can rearrange or even steal sound. And for reasons beyond the scope of tonight's presentation, it often does so in a very mathematical way. All right, so listen. Wind. Rustle, rustle, rustle. All right, now wind. Steal every other note. What do you get? To-ra-loo-ra-loo-ray. See? There is a scientific, logical explanation for everything. Almost everything. What there was not a logical explanation for was why my brother, freshly flown in from Seattle, even thinks that he's hearing a lullaby, an Irish lullaby, in Stepp Cemetery. Well, I scarcely had time to ponder the implications of this coincidence when suddenly he is sprinting past me yelling, "Run for your life! It's a witch!" Now, what do you do when your bigger, braver brother sprints past yelling, "Run for your life! It's a witch"? You may or may not soil yourself. I couldn't be sure. You run for your life. So now we're both stumbling and tripping over tombstones, and what had been a lovely path is now a death trap of tree trunks and tree branches. Finally, we get to the parking lot. Who has the keys? You have the keys. You drove. Oh, okay. Pop, trunk, not good. Beep, beep, beep. Panic alarm, maybe good, might scare the witch off. Finally, I find the door lock. It takes automatic door locks an interminably long time to actually unlock the doors when a witch is bearing down on you. But finally, the dome light comes on, the doors pop open, we jump in, we slam and lock the doors, and now I feel like I'm in a rental car. I know where nothing is. It's my own car. Finally, I find the ignition. She starts. The lights turn on. I pull out onto Main Forest Road, and we drive in silence until I ask, "What did you see back there?" I saw a witch. Well, technically she's not a witch, but go on. She was wearing a long black dress, sitting on a tree stump, singing to two tombstones, a lullaby, an Irish lullaby. She saw me, she glared, she swished me away, and she flew off. I saw a witch. I drove home in a cold sweat until my driveway. My brother breaks out in a deep belly laugh guffaw. Ha 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 ha, I got you again. What do you mean you got me? I didn't see anything back there. What do you mean, Tom? You described the Witch of Step Cemetery to a T. That is the legend of the Witch of Step Cemetery. You couldn't have known that. You've lived out west ever since college. You couldn't have known that. Yeah, but I grew up in Indiana, and I was a Boy Scout. And every Boy Scout sitting around the campfire hears the legend of the Witch of Step Cemetery. I saw the little sign, and I remembered it. I remembered her. I believe her name is Anna. I remembered her. We went inside. I changed my trousers and cleaned myself up. Yes, I soiled myself, but just a little bit. All right, it was very, very frightening, all right? And at the end of all my research, have I ever seen a ghost? No. Do I believe in ghosts? I don't know. I mean, yes, I'm a scientist, but I'm also a storyteller. And I believe in story. And I know that every October, or various times throughout the year, sitting around a campfire, on a hike to a haunted hollow, or at Bryant Park, or the Monroe County Public Library, we gather and we tell these stories, ghost stories, and many of them based on very real people. We tell the stories of their lives, their deaths, their afterlives, real or imagined. And so these people, these ghosts, like that phantom flare of a long dead sun, their light still shines on. And in that sense, they're very, very real. Welcome to the 45th Annual Festival of Ghost Stories. My name is David Matlack. I'm with the Bloomington Storytellers Guild. And for 45 years, we have been bringing you these ghost stories. And for the last many, many of these years, we have been doing so with our co-presenters, the Monroe County Public Library and Bloomington Parks and Recreation. So we'd like to thank Chris Hostler and the staff at the Public Library, and Crystal Ritter and her staff at Parks and Rec for making all of this possible. And a big shout out to CATS, Community Access Television, and Tom is here tonight recording this. All right, and we're here recording this in the beautiful auditorium, beautiful Monroe County Public Library in beautiful downtown Bloomington. And we're recording this because we determined that no matter what, rain, sleet, snow, hail, or pandemic, we were going to bring you some scary stories for the 45th consecutive year. And thank you so much for joining us. I don't need to tell you, these are very scary times. The world is very scary right now on so many fronts, in so many ways. So why tell scary stories in scary times? Well, we think scary stories help us face and conquer our fears. And there's something very interesting about spoken word scary stories. if we storytellers are doing our job, the story listener is making pictures of the story in their own mind. They're watching a movie of the story in their mind's eye. And it is said among us storytellers, I don't know that it's been researched, but it's certainly true for me. It is said that the mind will not make an image scarier than it can handle. All right, and this is in stark contrast to today's modern horror movies where you cannot unsee scenes that should never have been seen. All right, so in a way that's kind of empowering. It gives us some power over the stories. We don't take it to a place that we can't deal with. So we think scary stories are instructional, cautionary, but first and foremost, we think they're entertaining. So kick back or cuddle up and let us entertain you. Thank you for joining us.
Have you ever tried to learn an instrument? Have you ever had to listen to someone try to learn an instrument? Well, this is the predicament that Charlie was in. Now, Charlie was a lighthouse keeper, and he lived on a remote island with his wife. Now, Charlie had lots to do. There was a lot that needed to be done to the lighthouse every day, and the lighthouse grounds. They were out there on that island, the rocks and the waves. Lots of things could go wrong. So Charlie had lots to do. He had a trusty axe. He would chop up the firewood. He would make sure that the exterior of the lighthouse was in good shape. He even took care of the inside. Now, his wife, Myrtle, she didn't have so much to do. She wasn't a lighthouse keeper, and she complained about it bitterly. Why did I marry a lighthouse keeper? This is so boring. I have nothing to do out here. Nobody lives out here with us. This is boring. Well, thought Charlie, she is right. I guess for her, it probably is kind of boring. So he decided maybe they ought to go out one night. Maybe they ought to go and do something. So he bought some tickets for them to go and see a pianist. One of the finest pianists in the world. They were very lucky, came to their small town. So they went ashore and they went to the town and they saw this fantastic pianist. Well, Charlie was overwhelmed. This pianist was amazing. But Myrtle was completely awestruck. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. It was so beautiful. And she thought to herself, well, that's what I can do. I can play the piano. And she told that to Charlie. Charlie said to her, we live in a lighthouse. We can't put a piano in a lighthouse. We can't even afford a piano. Well, Myrtle was determined. You'll see. I'll get a piano. We can't afford a piano. Well, that's all she talked about for 2 weeks. Piano this, piano that. Until finally Charlie said, I've had enough. We cannot afford a piano, and we cannot fit one in this lighthouse. Well, as a matter of fact, said Myrtle, I bought a piano today. Well, where are you going to put it? How are you even going to get it out here? We live on an island. Well, my brother is going to bring it over in his boat, and I have cleared away this section right here for the piano. And he looked over, and sure enough, she had cleared a section away for her piano. She'd taken his rocking chair and his table, and she'd moved it out to his shed. Well, the next day, there came her brother with the piano. Put the piano right there where his chair had been. And Myrtle got out a little book. She placed it on the piano, and she started to play. Well, she was not very good, of course. And in a few weeks, she still wasn't very good. And after many weeks, she was terrible. She was insufferable, actually. And to make matters worse, she would only play one song. And Charlie said, "Will you at least play a different song? You're not getting anywhere with this song." Well, practice, practice, practice. It's the only way I'm going to get better. And I'm not going to learn a new song until I've learned this one. And she sat down again. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. Yep, that's right. And she would start all the way over at the beginning again. Da, 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 right at that same spot. Da, 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 da. Da, 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 da. Yep, there it is, right there. And she'd start over again. And finally, he was just at his wit's end. And he said, I got to go outside. So he went outside. He'd go into his shed. He'd chop wood. He'd do anything just so he didn't have to hear that blasted piano. And finally, at night, she would finally stop playing, and they could go to bed. But then she'd get up early the next morning, and she'd start playing again. And she'd just play all day and all night, and he couldn't escape it. There was nothing he could do. Well, finally, one day, a nor'easter started to blow in, and when he was outside, and he knew, oh, no, I have to go inside now. And the rain was coming down, and he thought, I've got to do something while I'm in that house. And he came in. Oh, and there she was at the piano. Da 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 da. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, all right, and she'd start again. And finally, he said, "Blasted Myrtle, please play a different song." She stood up and she said, "I'm not going to play another song until I get this one right. Practice, practice, practice." Oh, and he went into the bedroom and he slammed the door. And he got out his little pocket knife and he started to whittle. He thought, okay. Oh my gosh. The wind is blowing. It's incessant. The rain is pounding on the windows. She's playing that horrible song. Oh, and it just was over and over and over again. And he opened up the door again and he screamed at her, "Myrtle, stop playing that song. Play a different song." And she said, "It's practice, 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 and if I don't get it right, I'm not gonna play another song." Well, he snapped. He was done. And the next thing he knew, he was standing over a busted up piano. Well, he felt pretty bad about it. And he also felt kind of bad about the fact that he'd kind of chopped up Myrtle too. But he had to admit he felt worse about the piano. Well, he cleaned up the blood and the bits of the piano and Myrtle. And the next day, when it dawned bright and clear, he took it all outside and he buried it in the yard. And he went back into the house. And it was quiet. It was wonderful. He would never have to listen to another note on that piano again. Well, that night he went to sleep. It was beautiful. It was quiet. All he could hear was the wind and the ocean. It was terrific. But then all of a sudden, right as he'd gone to sleep, he heard a noise. No, he thought. And sure enough, over and over again, he opened up the door, and there, right where his chair used to be, was that piano. It had big gashes in it, dirt all over it, and it was playing all by itself. And he walked over to the piano, and then he heard a creak on the steps, and he turned around, and there was Myrtle, also with bits missing, dirt hanging off of her. And she said, "I told you, practice, 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 and I'm not going to play another song until I get that one right. And that was the story of the piano. Thank you.
This is an Irish folktale from the late 1800s. There lived in Cork, Ireland, a man named Daniel Crowley. He was a coffin maker by trade, and those who passed by his shop could hear the droning sound of the saw and the brisk, sharp whack of the hammer as Daniel and his apprentice Sean cut and formed coffins for the dead. A messenger came to Crowley's shop one day and told him there was a dead man at the end of town and to send up a coffin for him. At the wake house, the body was laid out on a table in a room next to the kitchen. There were 5 or 6 women watching over it. There were a lot of people in the kitchen. And when Daniel Crowley arrived, they asked him to help shorten the night. That is, to tell stories and sing songs and generally amuse everyone and himself. So he began to help shorten the night. And he told the best stories and he sang the best songs. Everyone in the company was so happy to hear them. And one woman was so pleased with what Daniel Crowley had done that she decided it would be good to help him by making a match between him and one of her daughters. So she went to Daniel Crowley and she told him that she had a fine, beautiful girl in view, and now was the time to get a good wife. He'd never have such a chance again. Crowley rose up in great anger and he said, "There isn't a woman wearing clothes that I'd marry. There isn't a woman born who could persuade me to make 2 halves of my loaf for her." Well, the mother became insulted, and she began to abuse Daniel Crowley. "Bad luck to you, you hairy little scoundrel. Why, you aren't fit to clean the mud from my child's feet. You only have the dead for company day and night. Well, if all the living were like you, I'd be quite happy with just the dead for company. And besides, I have nothing against the dead. After all, I'm getting my employment from them. Why, it's the dead that want coffins and not the living." "Then," said the mother, "'tis with the dead you ought to be and not with the living." And with that, Daniel Crowley jumped up on a chair and he raised his glass and he said, "This is to everyone who I have made a coffin for. I invite you to my house tonight, and I'll spend whatever it takes to give a feast." Daniel Crowley started home. It was a dark and windy night, punctuated by the wistful cry of the owl high up in the trees. He was a little bit tipsy from the potent punch they had been serving at the wake house. When he had left for the evening, his workshop was closed and shuttered. But now, as he looked into the distance, he could see there was light shining from every window, and he was in dread that the place was on fire or that there were robbers in it. He crept into a corner opposite the workshop to see what was going on. He could hear the faint sound of music. He could see figures walking in. He'd been there for some time when a man tapped him on the shoulder and said, "'Tis here you are, and we are waiting for you. 'Tis a great way to treat company. Come now." So Daniel Crowley went into the workshop with the man, and there, singing and dancing and amusing themselves, were people he had known in the past. The fiddler was named John Healy, and Healy hadn't brought a fiddle with him, but he made one, and the way he made it was to throw off what flesh he had on his body and rub up and down on his ribs, each one making a different note. He made the most beautiful music that Daniel Crowley had ever heard. Everyone else began to follow his lead, and they all threw off what flesh they had on their bodies, and they began to dance jigs and hornpipes in their bare bones, and their bones clanked and clacked as they bumped into each other on the dance floor. A man came up to Daniel Healy and said, "Do you know me, Daniel Healy?" "I do not. How could I?" "Well, you ought to know me, and you should, because I am the first man you made a coffin for. 'Twas I that gave you your start in business." Another man came up to him. "Do you know me, Daniel Crowley?" He was a lame man. "I do not." "Well, I'm your cousin. It hasn't been that long since I died." The fun and the music went on. There was one man, John Sullivan, who'd been married twice in life, and he came with both women. He took the second wife out onto the dance floor, and they began to dance a double jig, and they danced so well that everyone began to make merriment with them. The first wife became jealous, and she ran over to where John Sullivan was, and she said, "I have a better right to dance with you than she does." "That's not the truth for you," said the second wife, "for I'm the better dancer than you are, and I will dance with him whether you like it or not." "Hold your tongue," yelled the first wife, "for were it not for borrowing another pair of shins, you wouldn't even be here tonight." John Sullivan looked at both women, and then he asked the second wife, "Is it not your own feet you're on tonight?" "No, I borrowed a pair of shins from a neighboring woman, and they're hers I have on me tonight." "And why didn't you come on your own feet?" "Well, I wasn't good in life," said the second wife, "and I have a penalty. And the penalty is that I cannot go if there's a feast or a ball unless I can borrow a pair of shins." Sullivan was raging when he heard that the shin bones he'd been dancing with belonged to a third woman. He gave that second wife a slap that sent her spinning across the room. The fun and the music went on, and Healy was laughing. And then the friends of this woman rose up in anger, and there were no clubs or weapons around, so they tore off their left arms and they began to slash and strike. Soon there was an awful battle raging. While all this was going on, Daniel Crowley was standing over on the side of the room, cold and hungry and not sure but what he'd be killed. Sullivan was trying to dodge the blows, and he stepped on Crowley's toe. Crowley got vexed with him, and he raised his fist and he gave him a blow right to his head that sent that head flying to the opposite corner of the room. When Sullivan saw his head flying away, he ran and he caught it. And then he took the head and he aimed a blow at Daniel Crowley that knocked Crowley under the bench. Then, having him at a disadvantage, he ran over and he began to strangle Daniel Crowley. He squeezed his neck so hard between the bench and the door that Crowley lost all his senses and couldn't remember a thing. The next morning, Daniel Crowley woke up in a dark room. At least he thought it was a dark room until he tried to move. And then he found it was not a dark room at all, but a dark and stuffy coffin of his own making. He could hear Sean working inside the workshop. "Sean! Sean! Can you hear me?" Daniel Crowley was terrified that Sean would not find him in time. "Sean! Sean, can you hear me? Sean! Sean!" The end. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina Jones, and I've got two stories to share. I just had so many I couldn't decide. So the first one I'm going to tell you is a story that you actually will hear if you go around the Smoky Mountain area. And I like to think of this, I often think of this actually when I'm out walking my dog around this time of year, when the light changes a little bit and the wind picks up and there's a chill in the air. And often when I'm walking my dog down the street, I think I hear someone right behind me. But every time I look, there's no one there. And so this story starts way out in the Smoky Mountains on a remote mountaintop in a little cabin where a mountain man lived his whole life. And he was in his twilight years, just like about now. And he sat at his rocking chair in front of a fire, and he'd smoke his pipe. He didn't need to read. He didn't need to listen to music. He just liked to sit and watch the flame. And so he rocked back and forth, back and forth. And that's when he saw this creature rise from the coals and manifest right in front of his eyes. He was obscured and dark and willowy and sharp somehow. And he walked right out of the fire, silent, and sat right next to the mountain man. And that's where they stayed. The mountain man carefully smoking his pipe. There wasn't anyone around for miles. But he had to make a break for it, so he got up and walked out of the room as slowly and cautiously as he could, hoping not to disturb the creature. And as soon as he got to his door, he opened it and slammed it right behind him and started running as fast as he could down the mountain. And it wasn't long until he heard a bam! That was his front door. The creature was following him. The man was running faster than he had ever run in years and years and years. And up right behind him, as if he had flown right there, there was this creature. And he said, "Ain't nobody here. Ain't nobody here but you and me. You and me." Well, this redoubled the mountain man's efforts. He had to get away. And so he took a sharp right and he scaled up a tree, hoping that the creature wouldn't be able to climb. And that's when the creature started to claw up the tree. Ain't nobody here. Ain't nobody here but you and me. You and me. He got up right next to that old man's face. The old man couldn't bear it. He leaped off the tree, and luckily, he landed okay. And he started running down the hill, and that's when he remembered he was real near the road. And so he took another right, and he was heading toward the wall that kind of kept over the bankment. And he started climbing up the wall. He didn't hear or see the creature, and he made it almost to the top when he felt something tug his foot, and of course it was the creature. He looked down, ain't nobody here, and he shook him off, and he got to the top, and he fell on the road, and he blacked out. The next morning, the man woke right where he had landed, in the yard, in the road. It was sunny. He didn't know if it was a dream, but surely it wasn't a dream. He was here in the road. He looked up, and wouldn't you know, there was someone walking up the road, taking a morning hike. The man was weak, and he could feel that something was broken in his leg. And so he weakly waved to get their attention. But he couldn't see. He lost his glasses. But the person seemed to be coming towards him. And as he got closer, that's when he realized he wasn't alone. There was the creature. And he got up right on his face. And he goes, "Don't you worry. Ain't nobody here but you and me. You and me." And that's the story of Ain't Nobody Here. I don't know how it ends. That's where it ends for me. So my next story actually takes place across the pond, as it were, in England. This is an old story that they like to tell. So it seems that there were two sisters, Carol and Susie. Their father was a sailor, so he was often gone for months and months at a time. And their mother was busy with their little brother, Albert, who was still a baby and really fussy and kind of a mess. So he occupied a lot of the mother's time. So that let Carol and Susie just run free all over the English countryside. And they'd have great adventures and try to keep each other occupied. They didn't really have any money and they didn't really have any toys. They just had each other and their imaginations. And usually that was enough. Almost always, that was enough. Until one day, on one of their wanderings, they came across a family who appeared to be camping. And that was sort of how they lived. They just camped in field after field. And they were enchanted. They had heard of families that do this, and they were really enchanted by this idea. So they cautiously approached the camp, and that's when they saw this beautiful little girl about their age who had long, black, shiny hair and dark, sparkling eyes. She was thin, and she was sitting, and on her lap was this small, shiny silver drum. And as she would rat-tat-tat, out would come these mechanical figures, a woman and a man, and they would do this charming dance as she tapped away at the drum. And then as soon as she put the sticks away, they bowed and went inside the drum. It was the most wonderful thing that Carol and Susie had ever seen. Surely most precious thing that they had ever seen. And they wanted it. Oh my gosh, they wanted it so badly. And so they approached the girl and they said, may we hold your drum? May we try it? The girl looked at them with her shining dark eyes. She said, I have a feeling if I let you play with this drum, you're going to turn away and run away with it, and I'll never see it again, right? No. No. Yes, actually. How about this? How about I give you the drum? Carol and Susie couldn't believe it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Oh, there's a catch, said the girl. I'll give you this drum if you go home and just be really bad. Just be really bad. And then come see me tomorrow. Tell me how bad you were, and then I'll give it to you. Okay. I mean, they were generally pretty good girls. They liked to help around the house, and they got into some mischief, so they thought, well, why not? Why not be bad once in a lifetime? What could go wrong? And so Carol and Susie went back to their house, and there was Mother with Albert on her hip, and she was making she was making dinner. It was this whole big thing. And Carol and Susie started to shout, I don't want dinner. I don't want dinner. I hate dinner. I hate dinner. I hate your cooking. I hate your cooking. And they were shouting. Well, shouting wasn't allowed in their house. And their mother turned around and said, what on earth has gotten into you? And that's when they took the food right out of their plates and smashed it all over their clothes so their mom would have to wash them right away. Girls, you go to bed right now. Carol and Susie looked at each other. No, we don't want to go to bed. We're going to run away. And so they ran out into the yard and started playing. Their mother didn't know what to do. Finally, she was just too tired. She was too tired. So she said, fine, just come in whenever you feel like it, but don't expect any food. So the girls stayed out and played and thought it was pretty fun being bad. They couldn't wait to tell the girl what they had done. And so the mother and the baby finally went to bed, and when it was safe and there was nothing else around, the girls went to bed, and they slept pretty well that night. So the next morning, they got up, and they ran to where the girl was staying with her family. And they said, oh my gosh, I can't wait for you to get the drum. Now wait, said the girl, what did you do that was bad? And so they told her about the food and the yelling, and they wouldn't go to bed. The girl said, that's not bad. You guys are so lame. There's no way that that's bad enough to get this drum. No, you have to be really bad. Come back the next day and let me know what you do. Carol and Susie couldn't believe it. They'd never been that bad before. So they went back home. And this time they got really creative. They started stomping all of their mother's flowers. They started chasing the chickens away so they wouldn't have eggs. They started cutting their clothes so the mom would have to sew them. And the mom was just looking at them in utter disbelief. What on earth is going on? And they stuck their tongues out at her and said, "We're not telling you." And she said, "You know, if you keep on like this, I might have to leave. I might have to go away. And when I do, something might take my place with a wooden tail and glass eyes. Please stop being so bad." This got them thinking. But that was just a silly wives' tale. That's ridiculous. So they went to bed, not sleeping as easily this time. When they got up, they went back to see the little girl, and they told her about the cutting of their clothes. They'd never done anything like that. And chasing away their chickens, they weren't going to have eggs for like 6 months now. All of the things that they had done. And the girl said, "I mean, I guess that's bad, but I've done way worse. You're going to have to do much better." That is ridiculous. So Carol and Susie turned around, and they really wanted something precious. But they didn't want to lose their mom. But that was ridiculous, that old wives' tale. So they went back, and this time there was no one there. And so they didn't want to be in an empty house. That was kind of creepy. And so they went out to play. And then it got dark, and so it was time to go back in. And that's when they noticed that the lights were on, and there was good smells coming out of the kitchen. And they said, "Yeah, we're not going to be bad. We're not going to be bad this time." And that's when they walked into the kitchen, and they heard a thump, thump, thump on the floor. And they looked, and there was their mother, except coming out of the bottom of her dress was a wooden tail. And she turned and looked at them with glass eyes. The girls were so frightened. They ran out of the house, and they ran back to the girl, and they told her what had happened. Surely now they deserve it. But by the time they got to her, she was already loaded up on her wagon and headed out. And she was laughing. And she said, "I was never going to give you this drum. Didn't you know? It was just a game." And that's the story of the drum.
Hello, my name is Patty Callison, and I just wanted to say by way of introduction that when storytellers are getting their stories, when they're looking for stories, the ones they finally choose to be their own, for some reason or another, have spoken to them. The story that I have to tell you was collected by researchers from immigrants, but not the usual immigrants that we think of today, but from immigrants who had moved into California from China. And so this is a story from China by way of San Francisco. A long time ago, there was a wise man. And this wise man wrote a letter to the emperor to inform him that one of his ministers was corrupt. And he detailed in this letter all of the corrupt things that the minister had done. But the minister was a favorite of the emperor. So instead of the minister getting in trouble, the wise man got in trouble. A Chinese whistleblower. He was exiled to the south of the country, down into the jungles. Now, the old wise man arrived at the jungle, and there was a little village there of other exiles, people who had displeased the emperor and been sent away. It was right at the foot of a Chinese fortress. Now the wise man stayed there for a while, and he made friends with the other exiles. But after a while, the allure of the jungle called to him. And so he took his books and he went off into the jungle. He found a place close to a beautiful little stream with cold, clear water in it, and he built himself a thatched hut. And then, settling in, he crafted for himself a bamboo dipper. And with that bamboo dipper, he could pull up that clear water and make his tea. And then he would settle back, and with tea in hand, he would read. He would read all day. Now, sometimes he did have to go out and get food, and so there were fish in the stream, and there were berries that he could pick, and he even made himself a small garden so he could have some vegetables. His friends, the exiles from the village, were good to bring him things that he needed. And so his exile became in some ways an escape. He worked for a while, drank tea, ate, and read. He was a wise man, and he believed he could become even wiser. When he wasn't reading or working in his garden or collecting food, he took that opportunity to go walking in the jungle. And there were birds, and there were animals. He could see the mountains off in the distance. And all the time he walked, he would think about what he had read. All the time that he wasn't doing other things, he was thinking about all the things that he had read. He loved to read. One of his friends came up bringing him more books and some food, some supplies, and said, "Aren't you lonely out here?" And the wise man looked at him and said, Why no. I have the birds in the sky and the dragons in the water. I have the trees. I have the cinnamon trees and the pines. Breathe it in. I don't even need wine. I could get drunk on the smell of the cinnamon trees, said the wise old man. Now, one day, he was going through his books. He'd prepared his tea. And he found a book of poetry. Oh, he loved poetry. He had memorized so many poems. He could recite them by heart. And so he began to go through the old, tattered book. But he realized that the worms had gotten into the book. and the worms had eaten away some of the bottoms of the pages. Ah, I love that one. Oh dear, look at the damage on that. Finally, he came to the end of the book, and there he saw one of his favorite poems. He read it out loud. But then he came to the last words on the page. The sun on my old garden shines, but the rest of the poem, the last line, was gone. I know this poem. I know that line. The sun on my old garden shines. What is the last line? He couldn't think of it. He couldn't think of the last line. It bothered him. He knew this poem. He knew that last line, but he couldn't remember it. And so he started brooding. He didn't work in his garden. He didn't collect anything to eat. He didn't even make himself any tea. He just sat and thought about that poem. The sun on my old garden shines. Da, 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 da. He couldn't think of it. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He just thought about that poem. Eventually, one of his friends from the village made a pilgrimage up to the thatched hut. And he looked for the wise man, but didn't see him out and about, as he often would. And so he crept into the hut. And there was the wise old man with a tattered book in his hand and a very annoyed look on his face. On his dead face. Well, the wise man's friends were grief-stricken. He'd been such a lovely man, such a learned man. But they buried him, and they put his book in his hands so that he could rest with it forever. The clouds rolled in, and the people, as they made their way toward the village, thought they could hear sighs. Then it started to rain, and it sounded like fingers impatiently tapping, thinking, wondering. They got back to the village, and that night, as it rained and it roared with the wind, they saw coming toward them the ghost of the wise man. And he was still reciting that poem. The sun on my old garden shines. Ah, ah. sun on my old garden shines. Oh, what is it? Now the people were frightened. But they soon came to realize that the ghost of the wise man was just as harmless as the wise man had been in life. But they found him annoying as night after night the rain and the wind would roll in, and the wise man would come, saying the same lines over and over, carrying that book, "The sun on my old garden shines." Ah, what is it? If only he would do a different poem. If only he would do a limerick or even a jingle. But it was the same thing over and over again. Now, a young poet came and visited the village and heard the story of the literate ghost, and he was intrigued. He loved the fantastical. He loved the superstitious. He loved the folklore of it all. And so the young poet made his way up to the place where the wise man had lived. The thatched hut by then was a ruin, the campsite overgrown. And although the cinnamon trees and the pines still let out their wonderful aroma, he didn't see anything. So he decided he would spend the night. When sure enough, the storms rolled in, the rain started, and here was the ghost of the wise man, carrying his old, tattered, worm-eaten book. "The sun on my old garden shines." Oh, I can't remember. Over and over, he would say this. Now, the reading to the young poet, the reading of the poem was beautiful by the wise old man. But he became frustrated as well, and finally said to the ghost, "Oh, come on, get on with it." "The sun on my old garden shines." And the young poet looked at him, and he said, "Yes, say it, but I am gone, no flesh confines." "That's the rest of it," said the poet. "Oh," said the wise old man, and closing the book, he disappeared, never to be seen again. And that is the story of the ghostly rhyme.
This is a lovely decoration. Hi, I'm Jenny Ritchie. When I first came to campus, a long time ago, like in the late 1960s. I was so impressed with all the old buildings. I loved all of the structures that looked the way they must have looked a century earlier, maybe a century and a half earlier, maybe earlier than that. I loved going in those old spaces and feeling the history that had been absorbed by those walls. I never went looking for ghosts, and I never expected to meet one, because I spent most of my time not in those old buildings, but in the brand new graduate library school, housed in quarters recently built in the basement of the undergraduate library. I spent more time than most people there because I was a graduate assistant and I had an office. Well, I shared it. Well, there were 4 of us. There was Bill, Linda, my good friend Gay, and me. We each had a gunmetal steel desk. We shared a typewriter, an old manual typewriter that we could move from desk to desk, and with keys that clicked and a return that dinged when we came to the end of a line. We shared one phone. It was a large set on Linda's desk, a landline, of course, with a dial, rotary dial. I think because the phone was on her desk, that's why she was the one who got the assignment to go to the music library. We, the rest of us, were jealous. Yeah, she got to go walk across campus. She got to be out on our vibrant campus with that sunny October sky and that crisp air, and we were stuck in a windowless concrete block office. We expected her to be gone all day because, well, we would have taken our time with that. So we were surprised when Linda came running back in, and she was like out of breath and looked shaken. What happened? We said. Oh, I have had the weirdest experience, she said. Oh, we were ready to hear about it. I think I saw ghosts. What? Unlikely, said Bill. Well, listen, she said. You know the music library. You know it's supposed to be haunted. Well, of course we knew that. Everybody on campus knew about the music library. It was in the old music building. When they built a new music building, they'd moved everything out except left that as practice rooms. And on the second floor, there was the music library. It was a gorgeous old room with high ceilings and 9-foot windows and all this rich, dark wood paneling. Yeah, we knew the library. What happened? She said, I went in, and it was just noisy like usual. You know how it is in that building. You go up the stairs, and you're hearing, well, there's a piano practicing scales over here, and there's a violin tuning up over there, and one of those annoying voice students is doing that ah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha thing that they do. And it was just normal noise till I got to the library door. And then I went in, and as the door closed behind me, all the sound stopped. And I mean, it was not muffled. It was not library quiet. It was like I had no ears. There was nothing. And I could tell there should have been something, because at the reference desk in front of me, this man was standing up. His eyes were looking directly at me, and his mouth was opening and shutting like he was talking. And I couldn't hear a thing. I could just stare at him, because he was wearing a suit with a vest and a flat tie. and he had a mustache that took up almost all his face, and these little tiny glasses, you know, the wire-rimmed kind like hippies wear. And I looked around for help because I couldn't hear him. And there was only one other person in the library, and she was a woman over by the stacks, the shelves, you know, and she had a book in her hand. And she was looking at me. I mean, her eyes were bugging out of her head. And I was staring at her because she was wearing all this hair up on top of her head and a puffy sleeved blouse and a long skirt that went down to the floor. And her mouth was open like she was screaming. I couldn't hear anything. And I couldn't catch my breath. So I went to a window and I leaned out. It didn't have screens. I leaned out and there were trees all around the building. And I mean, they were big, old trees. And the dorms that are out there were nowhere to be seen. And I still couldn't catch my breath. I had to get out of there. I ran out, and as soon as I got on the landing outside, everything was normal. I mean, all the sound came back. There was the piano going up and down the scales, and there was the violin tuning and the voice student going, ah, ha, 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 whatever. And I ran back here because, you know, did I really see ghosts? I don't think so, said Bill. Nah, he said, those were music students. You know, somebody was probably smoking something, and you got a lungful coming up the stairs, and you had a hallucination. That's all that was. Linda looked like she was going to argue. But she didn't. I mean, it was the 60s. Everybody was having weird experiences. And what you did was you just went on and did something else afterwards. You just kept on going. And that's what we all did. But I did think about Linda's story when I went by the old music building on my way to fetch something for Professor Schumann at the history library. And when I was waiting, I saw a book on display. It wasn't a very impressive-looking book. I mean, so why was it on display? I opened it up. It was full of old pictures of campus. Now that could be interesting. I checked it out. I ran back to the office. I said, look what we've got to look at. Come on over here. So we all gathered around and we studied the old pictures. Is that building still there? Where's that building? What is this? And then we turned the page. And there was a picture of the old music school. Only it was brand new. In the picture, it was 1891. It was surrounded by tall trees, old trees, some of them taller than the building itself. Hey, said Linda, that's what I saw. You didn't believe me. You didn't think it was real, but that's exactly what I saw. It was your subconscious, said Bill. You probably had seen a picture like that before, and it was just in your subconscious. But Linda pointed at another picture further down. What about him, she said. I never saw his picture before. He was the first music school librarian, a Mr. Fredrickson. And there he was with his mustache, long and luxurious, his little wire-rimmed glasses and his suit with the flat tie and the vest, and I was reading on down. In fact, I started reading out loud. Shortly after the library opened, a curious incident was witnessed by Mr. Fredrickson and his assistant, Bessie Somerville. they both asserted that the figure of a young woman entered the library doors. This apparition had bare legs and loose hair and wore a brightly colored outfit. Mr. Fredrickson asked her name, but the woman appeared not to hear him and looked wildly around, then went to a window to look out and rushed out of the room. Concerned that this was an escaped lunatic, Mr. Fredrickson followed her out, but there was no one on the landing or the stairs. The young woman had disappeared. Upon hearing these accounts, students began referring to the library as haunted, although no further intrusions by spirits was ever recorded. "I told you so," said Linda. "I told you it was real." "You were in 1891, we said. You actually went back in time." "But you didn't see a ghost," said Bill. "Huh?" "No," he said, "you didn't see a ghost. You were the ghost." "I told you, I never thought I would meet a ghost. And I certainly never thought that I would meet one in the basement of the undergraduate library in a mundane, modern office. But you know, this world is full of possibilities. You never can tell. When you go in some old building and you get that sense of all the time that's passed there, the sense of the history that's soaked into the walls, well, you just can never tell. Open a door. What time might you step into on the other side? Friends, we are so glad you joined us here tonight. This has been the 45th Annual Festival of Ghost Stories. And it's been sponsored by the Monroe County Public Library since the very beginning. So we want to thank them again, and to thank particularly Chris Hostler for not only arranging and organizing, but also for sanitizing and keeping us safe. And we want to thank Parks and Rec, who have sponsored us out in Bryan Park for years and years and years, and particularly to Crystal Ritter and her staff, who took care of arranging the event tonight. And of course, we want to thank the CATS crew, our community access television station, who have been recording and preserving our stories for years and years. And thank you, Tom, for doing the camera work tonight. When you come to listen to ghost stories, we hope you get a little shiver down your back. Maybe you get a little chill, and maybe you also can feel the warmth of the community that comes together to listen and to enjoy ghost stories. Thank you very much. Have a safe and happy Halloween tomorrow.